Hello and welcome to Economic Forum, a program where we discuss various issues affecting our economy. These can be issues to do with tourism, with agriculture, with manufacturing, with elections, with politics and other things. We look at how these things or how these topics affect our economic development. My name is John Masogo. Today we are going to be looking at how innovation can be applied in many ways as it does in agriculture. There is a concept that is known as permaculture, and I was just educated that it's actually a shortcut for permanent and agriculture. It's an innovative concept which today we are going to hear more about from our guest, who is Linda Kabaira. Linda, welcome to Economic Forum.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for having me in the studio.
Yes, permaculture. Very, very interesting concept. When we were discussing about it before the program, you were saying actually it's a way of designing and redesigning, which is very, very important in our lives so that we don't remain stagnant. Tell us about permaculture.
Permaculture, like you rightly said, it's a short for permanent and agriculture. But over the years, it has evolved to just mean permanent and culture. Because it's been noticed that for any system to be permanent, it goes beyond agriculture, producing of crops, producing of all the other things. But the whole permaculture concept is actually about redesigning and designing systems that actually sustain humanity. And the whole design aspect, it's actually based on connecting all the different resources in a place. But the whole concept is appreciating the wholesomeness, that nothing exists in a silo. In the 1970s, it was kind of officially coined by Bill Morrison, an Australian who's late now, just looking at all the redesigning aspect as the key part of it. But the designing aspect is done in harmony with nature, in harmony with all the different planetary elements that exist. So this is what permaculture is actually about in short.
Well, there, Linda, it has gone beyond agriculture. And as you've mentioned that it was formally, and I suppose this person then started talking about it all over the place. But when you look back at our ways of life in Africa, and even in Zimbabwe in particular, would you say it was always there, even if the Australian had not pronounced it?
Yeah, I actually think the whole coining of the words, it's what probably appealed to us is new by just making it just giving it a name. But I think this whole permaculture issue has actually been existent within our spaces in Zimbabwe and possibly within Africa or the world over. Because what it is really, it's just making sure that elements are placed in places where they can benefit people in a maximum way. So as we move to talk about the key ethics, which are the care for the earth, which is one of the key...
And the care for the earth affects almost everyone. Those in agriculture, even those outside agriculture, because the land, the soil is key.
Yes, so that's the key ethic when we come to permaculture, the care for the earth. The whole designing aspect comes from there. And we can even bring in one of the principles, which is to observe and to interact. For you to actually care, you need to understand what is it that the earth beholds. When you understand what the earth beholds, the value that the earth gives you, it helps people to actually appreciate what it is. And as they interact with the earth, it brings a relationship that helps people to even start caring even more. Because I know the earth is the source of my life. So I need to take care of it. If I lose my topsoil, I'm going to lose my source of livelihood. I'm going to lose the source of my food. So this has always been there. And for us as Africans, the earth has been our foundation, and agriculture has been it. I know even as maybe where I come from, food that this whole nation used to actually eat was produced by the small-scale farmers, which is my grandmother. maybe your grandmother and my great-grandmothers. They've just been the ones that we're producing. So this whole concept of coming to care, coming to be nurtured is not new to us. It's what we've always been. And we are actually one with the earth.
Yes.
And
while we've been doing that, Linda, the concept is that you design and redesign. How easy is it to ask your grandmother and others to say, well, this is how we've been doing it for the last 50 years, 100 years, but we've come up with something new which will help you in this way and also realize good yields and profits? How easy is it, very briefly, before we end this segment?
so now what we've actually realized, because this actually needs people to come together. You can't redesign on your own. It's a collaborative process where people come, sit, look at the resources they have, look at where they are coming from, what are the resources that we have, and what sort of a future do we need. So this is what permaculture is actually about, coming together. We map the resources together. And after mapping the resources, what is it that we have and where do we want to go? What is the future that we want? So it's bringing the different generations. So it's a process of, it's an intergenerational process where we bring the different generations in the same place. My grandmother, my father, me, my nieces, my babies.
And AMA 2000.
Yes, AMA 2000 will
Yes.
also come into play because they are critical.
That's Linda Kabaira, who is our guest today. Today we're talking about permaculture, which was coined as permanent and agriculture, but it has moved on and grown much bigger because it looks at different aspects of life. When we come back in the second segment, we shall also be looking at ethics that pertain to the use of this concept. So join us in the second segment of Economic Forum. We are now in the second segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing permaculture. As we heard from our guest, Linda Kabaira, it is all about designing and redesigning. These are things that we've been doing in our communities over the years, but we formalize them to make sure that they grow and also they help us grow our economy. Now, Linda, we have to talk now about the ethics that you mentioned in the second segment. What should we do when we are observing permaculture so that it's all ethical and we preserve our environment while we also, gain something economically out of it?
First principle is the care for the earth, which is actually the source of where we can actually derive our income, derive our livelihood, and derive anything else that comes. Then the second ethic is care for people. So it's actually been noticed that it's not possible for you to just tell people or even encourage people to just preserve. People also need to obtain a yield from the preservation, the protection, and the use of the earth. So the earth also needs to take care of the people. So this is where we encourage the use of the locally available resources in a way that is sustainable, that ensures that we are still able to use the soil in a way that will encourage the generations that are yet to come to also still be able to access the soil. So under there, we look at ensuring that people can produce food, growing food, making no waste, using renewable resources, be it the energy. So the designing of it has to ensure that people are comfortable. So we look at, we have the sun. So how do we harness the sun so that people are able to access energy that will sustain them and make their lives comfortable? So in permaculture, we have a term that we call luxurious simplicity. You need to have your needs met, but in a way that is simple, which doesn't damage the ecosystem and the environment for the generations that are yet to come. So it's the way we use water. If we can recycle, right now there's a lot of we have water issues that we're sitting on as a nation. So how do we harvest water when it rains? How do we also take use of the grey water? The grey water is the water which has no fecal matter, which can still be used. but probably we are just letting it go away. But people still draw clean water from underground to flush toilets, when we can still make use of some grey water, bring it back and use it. So this is what happens in permaculture. It's thinking about all those things. So it's bringing the planners into the space, bringing the engineers into the space, so that we together think about how do we deal with these things. We cannot still talk about what's happening. It's not business as usual. Things are changing.
Yes. Well, were there, in fact, the ethics that you've just alluded to are very important, because at times those who are into activism about resources in different parts of the country, and also even the way we want to go the devolution way on these ethics, the earth. We complain at times about those who mine, or those who use the grounds and leave them there, or even cut trees, and those in the communities are left with nothing. I think that's all embraced in those ethics. Is it something that people are now aware of, being aware of themselves?
Mm-hmm. So maybe coming to the third ethic, which is the fair share, sharing of the surplus, or returning the surplus back to the earth. So the fair share actually looks at things from a holistic point, where we're looking how do the people, the care for the people actually come into play. How do we ensure that these people also get a share value of their resources that are in their areas, which is what you actually alluded to. When mining is happening in their area, how do they also benefit? In most cases, you'd find that miners come, they mine, they leave dump sites there, and that's all the community.
And they bring their own people to mine in those areas, yet there will be people living in those areas.
Yes. So we're saying if this project is done in the permaculture way, where we are coming, looking at the resources together, plan together, the local people are supposed to benefit equally. But also looking at we are supposed to bring all these three ethics together. The earth care. If we are mining, how are we taking the surplus back to the earth as well? How are we taking care of the earth that is providing the resources? Which is a question that still remains even up to this day. When people are mining minerals, when people are mining water from underground, everyone is drilling a bore today. If you have a 1,000 square meter, you drill a bore, 2,000 square meter, you drill a bore. What does that mean to the generations that are yet to come? Are we having plans for returning or replenishing the water table? But these are all the questions that we're having when we are in permaculture. How do we design this system in a collective way, so that we look at all these resources collectively in a connected way, so that when it rains, we also allow the water to be replenished into the underground, so that when we mine it from the bores, we are mining something that we've actually helped to get underground. Same as with the minerals. What inputs are we giving to the communities? Same as when we grow crops. How are we growing the soils, or we are just feeding the crop, and then we continue to mine minerals, we continue to create carbon fields without working on it? And at this point, we have climate change as another issue as people continue to grow crops. Are we growing in a way that will ensure that the generations that are coming in 10, 20, 50 years will still be able to look at us and say, okay, those people were good to us?
Permaculture is something that allows us to think. That's what you're saying, yes. Linda Kabaira, who is our guest today on Economic Forum, where today we're discussing permaculture, as we heard from Linda, that it is about designing and redesigning systems so that we continue to be sustainable. We cannot continue to be sustainable if we actually destroy our environment, because there will be nothing left for future generations. In fact, we know of so many places around the country where the environment has been degraded, has been destroyed, to the extent that we only say many years ago we used to get firewood, we used to get this and that. So join us in the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing permaculture. We are now in the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing permaculture. And as our guest said earlier on, it's about designing and redesigning, systems so that we continue to have sustainability in our communities. And while it started, with agriculture, but it's now all embracing. Almost every discipline now fits into permaculture to the extent that probably, Linda, you'll be thinking of a new term. But let's go on to the principles, the principles that make permaculture work. Which ones are they?
All right. Thank you so much, John. I think some of them have highlighted them just in
Yes.
passing as we are talking. But I'll start with the first one, which is the observing and interacting. For us to actually be able to redesign and design, we need to observe. We need to understand what is going on, what is existing, what is there. And then we interact with it in terms of understanding it, getting feedback. What happens if we place this element here? What happens if we decide to channel water this way? Then when we see the result, it helps us to then say, okay, at this scale, harvesting water from the roof, taking it into a pond will help our system to actually become more sustainable. But the key principle is let's understand what is going on. So it takes one to really look at what is happening.
So
Checking
how is
through.
this understanding
So you can,
going on in terms of your outreach? What is it that you teach communities to understand and appreciate?
So for us, it's the land speaks. Everything talks to us. Plants talk to us. So when you give yourself time to actually observe, look around you, the land is drying. The rivers are drying. The rivers are silted.
Litter is everywhere.
Litter is everywhere. So how do we come together and design something which is different, which doesn't scare us? So we use permaculture as a tool for hope, a tool to actually create a system that would help the generations that are coming. And maybe in some cases, we actually don't just need to sustain, but we need to regenerate, to bring life back. Looking at our souls, I think you've heard the term, souls are dying. Yes. So when you observe that, yes, when you observe that, you then need to understand, so what do we need to grow the soul back to its state, which is now bringing life back. So that's one of the key principles. Then along that, we also have another principle of no waste. We already talked about litter being a nuisance in this country. So do we really need to have all these big piles of litter, or we can avert the situation by sorting litter at waste? So it's something that we need to design. Where is our waste coming from after observing? So if our junk of the waste is coming from our kitchens, how do we manage this? And is it waste that we actually need to keep? So within our permaculture system, it's a space where we actually do not want waste. Because most of the waste that we see together, why are cabbages together with diapers? Why is sadza together with diapers? Why are plastic bottles together with all that? Why are bottles there? And you'll find most of the litter that are on our dump fields today, it's something that we can actually avoid. But because maybe someone has observed that, but really didn't bring the whole community together to talk about it. So it's about us collectively coming together and coming up with designs that helps us to manage these issues that we have as solutions.
What you're saying, collectively coming together, brings us to connectedness. Because while this may sound very simple, very fundamental, but it also connects even with big industries, with big corporations and so forth for our economic development. Talk to us about the importance of connectedness in permaculture.
So in permaculture, there are no silos. Everything is connected. We talk about wholeness. So we have what we call short supply chains, where we're looking at things locally. At my homestead, if I start recycling and doing that, it means I've managed at that local scale. But as we move to a scale that is much bigger, there are things that I need that are outside my home. This is where we need to connect with our industries. So this is where we need our engineers. This is where we need our planners. This is where we need all these different technical people, so that we can come together even as a nation and say, so what do we want?
In fact, Linda, as you talk about connectedness, for time immemorial, in the first place, people would pick bones, on the streets and bins and so forth, and take them somewhere where they were useful in industry. We also see people picking bottles. That's why you are encouraging people to separate them. Again, there's that connectedness from the ordinary person out there in the village or in the township with the big industry.
It's identifying who is where, bringing everyone at this table. Then we plan together and say, this is what we need. This is the future that we want. So this is where permaculture would actually now start making sense. And even on there, we have an issue of obtaining a yield. So when it comes to the earth care principle again, people would then ask, so what is in it for me? So if they are bringing bottles, what is the incentive of them separating? We have eliminated waste, but also what is the value are they getting from that?
Economically.
So economically, they would need value, and especially when we're looking at our young people who are actually key. They also need to understand, if I'm bringing bottles, what is the value of the bottles that I'm bringing? If I'm separating plastic, what is it? So maybe as a nation, these are some of the incentives that we also need to look at. What is it that these young people are getting? Yes. We look at wetlands today. People are building on wetlands. People are throwing litter on wetlands, and those have become dump sites. But if we come collectively and look at how all these systems can benefit us, we will be able to regenerate.
Maybe just to conclude, Linda, tell the nation, as you face them, how you are actually helping to bring about the value of permaculture through educational systems, change of curricula, and so forth.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. So in the work that we do, we are working with young people, giving them a platform to practically engage in sorting waste, harvesting water, growing food, but most of all, redesigning the spaces where they live so that it can help them to be sustainable. So we've worked within the ministry. We've come up with a guide, a book, which helps in terms of how one can actually redesign, how one can plant, how one can recycle waste, how one can actually fertilize their soil organically and be able to help. But we are working with and through the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education so that this education can actually be within the schools and also influence the existing curriculum, which is applied based and competence based.
Thank you very much, Linda, for coming to Economic Forum. That was Linda Kabaira, who came to talk to us about permaculture, how we can use permaculture in order to improve our lives, in order to improve connectedness, and also in order to remain sustainable for many, many years. All I can say is that if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do so on the numbers that are showing on your screen. If you'd like to engage with us, you can also do so on the social media platforms that you are seeing on your screen. If you miss some of the episodes of Economic Forum, you can actually view them on our channel, which is Economic Forum Zimbabwe. So on behalf of our guest, Linda Kabaira, who is a development practitioner, as well as the production crew, this is John Masugu wishing you happy viewing.